In this recording, we will look at the action group feature of AWS Bedrock Agents. We will create a Bedrock agent from the scratch by associating action groups to it. Now, the concept of action groups is similar to the concept of function calling in OpenAI. So the action groups define the tasks that we want our agent to execute to help customers or to answer customers' queries, right? And the agent, Bedrock agent, when it is associated with an action group, the agent can determine on the runtime based on the prompt of the user, like which task it needs to execute. And this picture sums it up all. And I'll go through this picture before we go into the hands-on part of it and before we create the agent from the scratch. And I'm very glad to, after I created this diagram, because I think once Einstein said that if you cannot explain things simply, then you have not understood it well enough. I showed this diagram to my wife, and in less than 50 seconds, she was able to understand what's going on. She understood the concept. She is not from technology field. She is from healthcare field. Let me see if I can make this legible to my audience here. So the user first asks a question. So this is the prompt. What is the temperature in Fremont? And this is what we'll actually use in our demonstration also today. So this prompt now goes to the Bedrock agent. Now this Bedrock agent, if you have gone through my previous recordings, right now you can create a Bedrock agent with only Anthropic Claude model, either version 1 or version 2. So our Bedrock agent is powered by the Claude model. So once it gets the prompt, it since we have associated with an action group, right, it semantically matches the prompt with the task that I have defined in the action group. Now, how did I define the task in the action group? Let's delve a little deep into action group now. Action group has two components that we specify, and we'll see that when you see the demonstration. One is the Open API spec, not OpenAI, Open API specification. Through the Open API specification, I provide the description of the APIs, how they needs to be called, what method it needs to use, what parameter it needs to use. Everything is in the Open API spec, right? How does the Open API spec look like? Let me show a sample which we'll be using in the demonstration as well. So this is how a Open API spec looks like, where I give the title of the spec, right, which is the temperature and weather API, because the task that I want to give the agent is to get the temperature of a city, right? I describe the API. So this is the API to get the temperature information of a city. These are very important because the prompt is semantically matched to this description. Then I give the path, right? So this is the endpoint that it needs to call to get the temperature. The summary is get the temperature information of a city. Description is retrieve the temperature information of a city. Operation ID is get weather info. The parameter that it takes is the city, right? So when I say what is the temperature of Fremont, it actually understands that the city I'm talking about is Fremont, right? So that it can then pass it to the function which will call the API with the city, right? The city is of type string, and then response, how the response should be, right? If it is a 200, if it's an okay response, right? That's what we define in the Open API spec. So this is one of the component of the action group, right? The other component is a lambda function, right? Why a lambda function is required? Because once the Bedrock agent semantically matches the prompt, goes through the action group to identify which Open API or which API parameters to call, that information is then passed to a lambda function. And this is where we put the, or we code the actual business logic of calling the endpoint using the parameters. And after we get the response, this is where we format the response in the way we want to, and then send this information or this response back to the Bedrock agent. So here, if you see, after the Bedrock agent gets the prompt, it through the action group, it gets the API path and the parameters by semantically matching the description of the API with the prompt, hands it over to the lambda function. Lambda function knows now the API endpoint and the parameters. With that, it calls the API, gets the answer, gives it back to the Bedrock agent. Bedrock agent then knows, okay, the response is, so the API endpoint just gives it the value of the temperature is 20. Bedrock agent then formats it or writes it in a human language, right? It's a more English language, that the temperature in Fremont is 20, and this is what is sent back to the user. This is what now we will set up in AWS Bedrock through AWS Bedrock console. We'll create this agent from the scratch. In my next recording, I'll show how to do this entire thing programmatically without going into the Bedrock agent console at all. We can do this entire thing through a Python program. Right? Now let's go to the Bedrock console and see how we can create this agent from the scratch. Yeah. So let me open up the Bedrock agent. So this is where I'll create the agent. Now, before creating the agent, what I need for the action group is a Open API spec and the lambda. So we'll create this first and then come back to the agent console and create the agent. Now the Open API spec that we will use is this here, right? Now for the Bedrock agent to use this Open API spec, I need to first upload it to an S3 bucket. And later when I create the agent, I need to associate that S3 bucket, right? So we'll come to that association first, but let's upload this to an S3 bucket. So this one, I have already saved it to my local computer in my documents folder. From there, we'll upload it to S3. So let me go to AWS S3, right? I already uploaded it. Let me actually delete it again, and then we'll re-upload it. Let me delete this. Permanently delete. Right? Permanently delete. So this has been deleted. Now we'll re-upload. So this is the bucket that I have created. I'm not showing how to create a bucket because I think if my audience has come this far, they will know how to create a AWS S3 bucket. But after you create this bucket, now I'm uploading the Open API schema, which is this, right? Which is nothing but this content here. I am uploading it to the S3 bucket. Right. So now my Open API spec in YAML format is available in the bucket. Right? So this is one component of the action group. The second component is the lambda function, which I have already written here. Right. So if you see the lambda function, the way I wrote it is, so when the Bedrock agent identifies which of the API to call by semantically matching the prompt and the OpenAPI spec. The information like the API path, the parameters, right? Those are passed to the Lambda function through the event object, right? The event object is a JSON with all those information from the OpenAPI spec, right? So I'm getting the API path from the event object through the API path key, right? So this path here, this one will be available through that key API path. The parameters for the API will be available through the parameters key. But this parameters right now, I have only one parameter, which is city. If I have multiple parameters, it will be list. Since I have one parameter, I'm taking the first component of it and the value of this parameter, right? So when we will execute this, we'll print the event and we'll show you like how it looks like. It will be more clear. But the language, the Bedrock agent is from my prompt, it is actually capturing the value of the parameter also, which is the value of the city, which I gave Fremont, right? That value, I'm taking it, I'm converting it to a lowercase, and I'll tell you why the lowercase very shortly. Right? Then I am calling the formatting the URL that I need to call to get the weather of Fremont, right? Which is this here. Now I used where mockup to mock up that weather UI. Let me show that mockup also. So this is where mock .cloud, right? Where mock allows us to create mock APIs, and this is the mock API, right? Where I created get weather info / Fremont. This is the endpoint that I have specified, and I said I want it to return as 20, right? This I have saved. Now when I save it, I can, this is the mockup, and to call it, this is how I call it. So I take, so this is the server where it gets deployed. This is the endpoint that I have created, right? So if I run it, you'll see it gives 20. Now Fremont is in lowercase, and that is why the city also I convert into lowercase, right? And then when I construct the API, this is the server where the API mock API is. This is the API path. API path is nothing but this one here, right? Which the agent will get from the path get weather info, right? And then the city is Fremont, right? So that is what I concatenate here to get the API URL. Once this is done, then I use request.get to call the API URL. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that I did a pip install of requests here. This is not the way you will do it when you productionize a Lambda. This is a workaround. In actual production, you will create a Lambda layer and add the packages that you need for a Python program, right? But for now, I just call the subprocess.call and pip install, right? That's why that's how I have access to the request package of Python. I am doing a get call again, right? This is now how I'll code in production also. Here I just coded the happy path, but the API may not be available. Some other errors may come. So ideally, we should be coding it into a try except block, right? Which, since I'm not teaching a Python class here, I'm not going there. It's an happy path where I'm calling the get method of request with the API URL. I will get the information response back. So if you remember, the response that I'm returning back is 20, right? This is what it will return back, 20, which I mentioned in the mock API. Well, if I call this API, it is returning me 20, right? This 20 is what I'll get in the response string. Now I'm creating the response body with this response string, right? So the response string is a JSON temperature, and the temperature value is 20. This is where I'm passing the response JSON, creating the response body with the content type is JSON. Body is the response back from the API. And then I'm creating the action response. The action response must follow this structure for the Bedrock agent here. So I have the action group name here. The action group will also be available in the event object through this key, API path key, then the HTTP method, which is get here. The parameter is the city parameter. HTTP status code is 200. And this is where I'm plugging in the response body, right? And then I'm returning. And again, the return should also be like this for the Bedrock agent. So I have a message version, response, which is the action response here, session attributes, prompt session attributes. These are empty for now. In a subsequent recording, I will also talk about these things. But for now, we are returning the action response from this URL, right? This is my Lambda. So I have created the Lambda and deployed it, right? There is one more thing that is left here, is to provide access to the agent to invoke this Lambda. We'll come back here after we create the Bedrock agent to provide that access, and I'll show you how to create that, how to provide that access. So let me now go back to the Bedrock console and start creating our agent. So create agent, I'll name it Bedrock agent, let's say action group AG 01, right? This agent uses an action group. This is optional, the description, but I'm still giving it group. User input. Select whether the agent can prompt additional information from the user when it does not have enough information to respond to an utterance. Mark it yes. So basically, if the question is ambiguous, we are saying that the language model can ask follow-up questions to get more information from the language model, right? Then the agent resource role, I'll create and use a new service role. I'll let AWS create it. Next, this is where I am attaching the agent to the model, language model, which is, as I mentioned, right now we have only Claude models available from Anthropic, right? And the instruction I'll give is you are a helpful chat assistant. You answer user queries based on the provided functions. You answer user queries by using the provided functions only, right? So this is the instruction that I have given. Next, now I'm creating the action group. I'm creating this action group here. So I'll give a name first. So I'll say it's a current weather. This is the name of the action group. This action group specifies a task which retrieves the temperature of a given city, right? And then the Lambda function that we have created, this is the Lambda function, Bedrock Lambda function. If you remember, this is the Lambda function, Bedrock Lambda function. This is what we'll specify now here, right? So we specified the Lambda function. Next, I need to give the OpenAPI spec, right? OpenAPI spec, right? This is where now I'll browse S3. This is where we have uploaded this bucket is where we have uploaded the API spec. API spec, OpenAPI spec is this. I'll select this, choose. Next. Knowledge base, we are not in this recording, we are not talking about knowledge base. I'll have a separate recording to show how to use a knowledge base also for a retrieval agent. For this recording, we'll skip this. Now we are ready to create the agent. So review and create the agent. Go ahead and create the agent. The agent will be created in a moment. After that, we have one more activity that is remaining, which is to provide access to this agent to invoke the Lambda function. So for that, I need the agent ARN. I'll copy the agent ARN. Right. Let me close some of these things. I will go back to the Lambda. Now under configuration, I will add permission, right? Resource-based policy statement is what I need to create, right? I'll add permission. It's an AWS service that I'm giving, because the AWS service here is Bedrock service, right? So within that service, I need to give access to the agent to invoke the function, right? So choose a service. Bedrock you'll not find here. So you choose other. When you say choose other, give a statement ID first. Unique statement ID will say Bedrock agent invoke Lambda, right? Let us name this. And this is where I need to say what is the principal, right? What is the service that I need to give access to. So ours is bedrock.amazonaws.com. Bedrock.amazonaws.com. This is where I will put the ARN of the agent to which I want to give access to invoke this Lambda function. So Lambda invoke function, right? Save. Oops. Okay. Already exists. So this name already exists. I'll just say 01, right? Save. So now I have given access to, so this is our policy. I've given the Bedrock agent to access and invoke that Lambda. Now we are ready to test it out. So let me say, what is the temperature of Fremont? Let's see what it does. Just loading the response. Loading the response. It's actually getting the spec, OpenAPI spec, the Lambda, it will call the Lambda to get the response. Yes, the temperature of in Fremont is 20. If I look at the trace, pre-processing, if you look at my previous recording, I explained what each of the stages. Pre-processing did not find any malicious content, so it passed it to the orchestration. Orchestration, first thing that it did was it identified that this is the API path, right? It identified the parameter, it identified which is the method, right? And then in step 2, it called the API, got the answer, right? Temperature in Fremont is 20. And if you remember, last time I said the post-processing is by default disabled, and we did not enable it, so it is disabled, so nothing happened in post-processing. We could have given a post-processing thing as well, right? But right now, we have our answer, right, to the orchestration, and this is what we got back, right, as the final answer. Now let's also look at the Lambda log, right, and see what the log has. So I'll go to monitor, view CloudWatch. So when it called the Lambda, I printed the event. I wanted to show what the event object has. So if you go to the latest log, which is this one, this is the event log, right? Now you can see what the event log that has, right? It has the HTTP method, which is get, right? It has the API path. It was able to get the API path correctly. And the parameters, as I mentioned, the parameters is in a list. We have only one parameter named city, and see, it is able to plug in the value also, right? And that is what we have taken in the, like if you go to the code, right, you'll see that is what we have extracted from the event, right? Let me show that API path. We got it from the event object API path. Where is API path? This is API path, right? And the parameters, we got it from here, right? That is this code here. City equal to parameter 0 value dot lower, right? So this is what I wanted to show as part of this recording. We saw how to create a Bedrock agent with action group, and the entire process is summarized here, right? We explained this. The user asked a question, what is the temperature of Fremont? The Bedrock agent took it. Bedrock agent went to the action group, found out which API to call with the parameters, passed it to the Lambda function. Lambda function called the API, got the answer, gave it to the Bedrock agent. The Bedrock agent formatted the answer in a human English and sent it to the user, right? So this summarizes this recording. Now in my next recording, I'm going to show how to do this entire thing programmatically. And this recording will be part of my Medium blog also. I will also provide the link to the Medium blog, which will explain a little more on action group. That's all. Thank you for today. Bye-bye.